Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mark Schumacher with the Home Furnishings Association, and this is one of our biweekly webinars. And this one is going to be focusing on the cost of delivery. This is a huge part of your bottom line, but what goes into those numbers and what are the things you can do to trim costs and be more efficient? We're going to hit all these things today. We got a great panel to talk to because this is a very, very important subject that we've had so many comments and input from retailers wanting to learn more. So that's why we're here today. A couple of bits of housekeeping here. First of all, I want to mention the fact that if you have a question during the broadcast here, down at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A tab. Click on that, enter the question. We'll do our best to get to that. We promise you. And as always, please visit myhfa.org/webinar. If you go there tomorrow, this particular webinar will be there along with all the others we have done. It is a library of incredible information that is at your fingertips on demand, and so many people are utilizing it. So please do the same. And we also want to thank Synchrony. They are the sponsor of our thought leadership here in education at HFA. All right, let me tell you about this panel that we have, and it's a goodie. We've got Carl Monson joining us. He's the manager of operational support and fleet for Slumberland. They're a top 100 retailer and good friends here to HFA, and he's been doing what he's doing for more than 25 years. So we've got a lot of experience. Carl, we appreciate you being here. Jordan Markwart's joining us. He's the distribution center manager for HomeTrends. They are an Ashley home store chain in the Nebraska area. And if you've been an avid watcher of our webinars, many members of their team join us. They're very progressive and very good at what they do. So Jordan, thank you for being here. Also, we have Hunter Riley, co-founder and CEO of Schlep. Maybe my favorite name for a company I've heard recently. He deals with third-party delivery, but they're really a reliable logistics company. They're really helping a lot of small, medium-sized businesses to really be able to excel in this area. We look forward to talking to you as well, Hunter. Thank you for being here. And finally, we got Chris Garrison. He's director of partnerships for Onfleet. It's a San Francisco-based technology company that's helping businesses streamline their delivery operations. So, gentlemen, thanks. Good to have you here. We appreciate it. It's interesting that when we set up these webinars, the folks that sign up, we ask, hey, do you have questions leading into this? And it's really interesting to see these sometimes because you can kind of see where the real areas of concentration need to be for this conversation. And the first thing is, right out of the gates, is determining cost when it comes to delivery. It's more than just, paying your drivers and things of that sort. So really determining the real cost of delivery is a key for people to budget and to manage. So I'm going to start out with my retailers first. Carl, I'm going to start with you. Can you give me an idea about really how you determine in your business there at Slumberland, how you determine the real cost of delivery?
Getting to that number is kind of difficult. There's so many things that go into it with what between the fleet, between the staffing and all of those things. And then for Slumberland, I think it's interesting that because we have such different size spaces, we have smaller markets and extremely large markets, that going into those things to look at it, it's really just figuring out what we're spending in the back room, what we're spending to get that work done, and then working through some of that. So we have a pretty good range when it comes to what it costs to do a delivery based on the efficiencies of a larger market compared to some of our smaller markets. I think when we looked at it, we had like 62 different line items that we were calculating up to get to.
Can you just out of curiosity though, can you just maybe give us some broad categories, maybe 2 or 3 that are the key areas that you've got to be concentrating on when you're looking at what your true cost of delivery is?
A lot of it was fleet costs. So how much does it cost to get those trucks out on the road? The staffing was a big part of it. That payroll is a big chunk of what it takes to get out there. The supplies in the back room, rewraps and blankets and all of those things that go into making sure that the product gets to the customer's home safe and sound were big portions of it.
Okay. Jordan, jump in here. I'd love to get an idea from you all as well.
Yeah, so very similar of what we use to factor in our total cost of delivery. We have, obviously labor is the big one. Paying your employees to get the goods all ready for delivery, and then also during transportation. Labor costs, fuel obviously is a big one. You got to have fuel to drive your trucks, and then also the wear and tear on your vehicles that are doing the transportation for you. I feel like that can be lost a little bit, but it does not just only cost what your fuel charge is. It's wear and tear in your tires, wear and tear in the vehicle, and just divide the normal cost of your services by how many miles you drive, and you got to add that in there too. So and then obviously just how what Carl mentioned too is all the supplies that goes into making sure that it's delivered safely.
So before and guys, I appreciate you letting me hang with you two for just one more second. So what then in both of your businesses are those measurables then that you have to supply to your CFO or to finance in order to really budget for this? So like what are the specific measurables that you guys utilize, and we're hopeful this will be something that other retailers can pull from in this discussion?
For us, we do track every single route that goes out. We do track exactly to the penny on what it costs us that day to send out that crew on that delivery route, and then
Okay.
we also go and weigh that back against what we gained in profit, or what we gained on the bottom line with how much we charge for delivery that day. And
Okay,
so
so per route is what you
yeah,
utilize. Okay. Carl,
yeah,
anything
yeah.
you want to throw in there before I bring the other guys in this conversation, as far as what are those measurables that you have to deliver on for your company?
His cost per route thing sounds really cool. I want to talk to him about that in the future. But
Okay, there's one takeaway. All right.
we look at obviously those big costs that are coming in per route, per stop is kind of where we want to see where it's coming into. So what does it cost to get each stop out onto the road?
Okay. So I want to bring Hunter and Chris in here to the conversation. You guys, obviously Hunter, you're third party delivery, and Chris, you're really helping folks streamline. Can you talk a little bit about what you recommend that any retailer, even if it's a single store operator, what are those specific areas they need to be really conscious of when it comes to the cost? Some of these sound basic, but in the same respect, I can see some of these getting out of hand if you're not really minding the store, if you will. So, Chris, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take a stab at that. And thanks for having me here today.
Sure.
I think it's really important to understand the overall picture of cost within the supply chain. So last mile specifically, delivering goods from store to door or from distribution center to door accounts for about 40 to 50% of the overall supply chain cost, which is insane when you think about it. That's a huge number. There's huge opportunities for efficiency. Now, Onfleet, we operate both with retailers themselves running their own in-house fleets, or with third parties like Slurp, who are running on behalf of those third parties. Either way, it's about running a profitable route. And how do you define a profitable route? A profitable route really has to do with density. So building routes that have multiple stops in a designated area, allowing you to run perhaps not quite the density that maybe Amazon operates at, but keeping those routes tightly considerated, working with third parties where necessary to consolidate those routes, and then ensuring that you're using communication tools, customer notifications, so that customers are actually there to receive, especially with big and bulky and furniture delivery. Missed deliveries account for a huge volume of the overhead. And that's going to be a really big burden on those individual retail and furniture providers. So we really encourage leveraging tools that help you optimize for efficiency, keep people in touch with the route and the progress, and making sure there's two-way communications on the statuses to build for efficiency and make for a pleasurable experience.
Yeah. Hunter, go a little bit deeper on that. And thanks, Chris. That's good stuff. Would you go a little bit more on this whole concept of, I like what he said about a profitable route and consolidating. That sounds like that's got to be a really key important piece here to the planning part of really keeping your costs in line.
Yeah, absolutely. Geographic proximity is what really drives our decision making with our route building. So at Schlep, we try to provide quality first, and consistency of quality is key. And that's why we operate with an employee-only group of individuals who we call associates, field associates. And in doing deliveries for our retail partners who are coming through our warehouse, or for our boutique partners and interior design partners who are around the city, we're looking to make sure that we have consolidation both in deliveries from our warehouse and then geographic proximity for how we route our vans. We operate with a fleet of cargo vans with 2 associates in every van, how we route them to that next delivery. And that's really key for us keeping our costs down. What I would say, to the point that Chris made, is within the entire supply chain, this is the most expensive part of that supply chain because it's the most labor intensive. It's the most hands-on part of that. And we've discovered that's a value that a lot of people underestimate. For us, the only way to be able to meet the price expectations with also creating the quality that we consider to be top-notch, just like in-house delivery at any furniture company that's listening in, you can control a lot more of it, but you still have to look to those efficiencies with the geographic proximity.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, and those numbers are kind of mind-boggling. If you're talking about 40 or 50% of your supply chain costs are involved in this delivery piece, Jordan, that's kind of crazy to me, but clearly why there's got to be attention on this, on even just again, I think we're talking about just routes here and just making sure there's efficiencies within even that part of the process. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's probably the most important aspect is, making sure that you have a very a very clean route, that you're not zigzagging through town, or making multiple stops to the same town on different days even. And so making the most of your route is where a lot of the cost is, a lot of the money is saved.
Carl, any thoughts on that?
I like to refer to it as a big dot to dot puzzle. That's a little bit easier if there's more dots in that puzzle. So the miles per stop, or getting the miles down per stop, is a big thing that I talk about a lot with some of those efficiencies, to get a full truck and get it out on the road without driving more than you need to.
Yeah, I mean, some of this sounds so basic, but I find that it's so interesting that most of our webinar subject, no matter what it is, we got to deal with that stuff that's the low-hanging fruit, that is this simple stuff. If you're not, so what I'm hearing is, if I'm sort of logically building this backwards, is what I'm hearing to get to that point is it's just a question of, if you're not paying attention to the route, to the time spent, that so much of that is the efficiency piece that you've got to start with. And so Chris, since you kind of started us on, this is a very excellent path we're on here. So with all of that in mind, then, so what are some cost saving strategies that people out there can utilize? And you don't have to just keep it just to this route running and all that kind of good stuff, but what are those cost saving strategies that you see as being the key things that people should be involved with?
There are the obvious cost savings, right? When you're implementing a good routing solution that's dynamic, that's taking into consideration historic real-time predictive traffic patterns like we do, you inherently have more efficient routes. That's less time on the road, sure, more time with the customers. And I actually do want to go back to what Hunter was saying about quality of delivery, because there's actually some really hard to define hidden costs in there. And specifically, another statistic I love to throw out is 84% of consumers will not return to a vendor if they have a poor delivery experience. So if you imagine you get a failed delivery, late delivery, they're upset, they're not getting what they ordered, that's a potentially lost customer. And when brands are spending $40 to $50 per customer acquisition, and the lifetime value of that customer is lost, man, you really need to make sure that experience is really high quality when you're running that delivery. And one of the ways that we all help provide this with tools like Onfleet and others is basically providing transparency during the actual delivery process, ensuring that there's traceability, trackability, the consumer knows when to expect that delivery. And if there are delays, it's proactively and automatically communicated. So there's always going to be opportunities for tweaking the algorithm, getting a few more cents out of the dollar, but really just, like Slurp does, and making sure that you guys, all of you, have that world-class white glove experience that customers have come to expect. That's really going to build a more valuable experience and overall value for the brands.
Yeah,
go ahead,
jump in. No, Hunter,
I was going to piggyback off of what Chris was saying. Like, as far as route building goes, you want to be able to provide the customer as many options as possible when it comes to scheduling. Okay. And that's a huge part of balancing customer expectation with consolidation and routes. And I think you have to balance that in a way where you don't sacrifice customer experience. And that's one of the ways that Schlep operates as far as our nimbleness. and creating that quality of experience because it's quality of scheduling. So it's from the get-go, the scheduling call to the actual like removal of the debris on site and interaction with the customer that really creates the experience you're talking about there, Chris. And so I think that's super important to understand is that the scheduling is just as important as the interaction on site. And so
But I want to go deeper on that real quick. I want to go deeper on that real quick though, because you said something interesting that I think is a little counterintuitive. You're saying giving the customer more options is a cost saver, because a lot of times I think we think options means the opposite. Explain that, unless I heard it wrong.
Yeah, no, and what I'm saying is that if a customer has to wait 2 weeks for an item from your warehouse, that's part of what they're going to describe as their customer experience and why they may not come back. It's not just if you are unable to complete the delivery or don't show up on time for the delivery, or your employees or contractors, if you go that route, aren't providing a good experience with their interaction with the customer. So the scheduling and the availability is a part of that overall experience.
You know, in another webinar, we talked about, and it's in the library, we talked about really a lot about delivery teams and their customer service. We're not going to get into that specifically today, but Jordan, I wanted to ask you something that just said, I thought it was interesting that Chris said, and it's a great line. He said, less time driving means more time with the customer. I love that, because I think that a lot of us think fast is better, in and out. Thank you very much. Would you react to that? Does that make sense, and does that give you a better option for that customer experience piece of this, and also trimming some costs?
Yeah, no, I love that line. I'm gonna definitely use that myself, because yeah, one metric that we lean on, Carl was kind of mentioning this a little bit, but is the delivered dollar per mile is a big one that we use just to see exactly how efficient our routes are. And we have a very large delivery zone here in Nebraska we have 3 stores that we run out of 1 DC, and the 2 farthest stores that are farthest apart from each other, it's like 150 miles. And so we do it all out of 1 DC. And so our big goal is to, get those routes as efficient as possible. But we do struggle with a lot of drive time for us. And with rural Nebraska, it can be 400-mile round trip in 1 day for, just a few orders. So.
And Carl, would you, gotcha. I mean, and regardless, anybody watching this maybe they've got a smaller delivery area, maybe not, maybe it's more complex, but do you also, is that delivered dollar per mile? Is that something that you guys also utilize at Slumberland in certain ways?
We don't look at the dollar per a lot of things too much. We try to look more at the work that's being accomplished. So it's a lot of cubes per stop, or cubes per mile, or things like that, where we want to really focus on the amount of work that's being done. So we're giving the same kind of service to somebody that bought a $499 sofa to a $1,000 sofa, because it's still a sofa that we're delivering. So when we talk with the teams, we really want to make sure that we're focusing on the work that's being done and the interactions that are happening in home and on the delivery, as opposed to really focusing on how much they're going to be delivering to a specific customer, or trying to figure out what the efficiencies are within that day.
Yeah, I just think that we're already finding here that even from business to business, there are so many potential metrics here that are involved. But I do think that you're just basically saying there's got to be measurables. You're really looking at the efficiencies of your teams, regardless of how that works out. Before we get any further past that, Chris, are there any other cost saving strategies that you can think about?
Absolutely. When you think of the day-to-day of a driver, drivers are actually hard to come by these days. They're hard to train, they're hard to retain, so you've got to give them tools they like to use. We provide a driver application that just gives them all the instructions, all the feedback they need, so that when they arrive, they know that they need to go to the elevator bay around the back, not to the address in the front. That's going to save them 15, 20 minutes just trying to figure out where they're supposed to park. It gives them a heads up the recipient a heads up that the driver's arriving in 5, 10 minutes. Make sure that elevator bay is cleared, that you're ready to receive them. These are all the little micro efficiency gains that cumulatively add up to huge efficiency improvements. So when you go from, let's say, and this is still very common across industries, people running routes with pen and paper. They come and say, these are my orders for the day. I'm just going to kind of draft them up. I'm going to use Google Maps. I'm going to trace it all out. Here's a paper manifest. Well, that's not very dynamic. That's not taking into account real time. but that's all giving any tools to those drivers. So when you go from a system like that to an automated system that can actively build routes for you, and you're saving already hours there just in building the optimized routes,
Mhm.
giving your drivers tools that they like for efficiency purposes, two-way communication, gives the customer feedback ability, gives them the 5-star ratings at the end of the delivery, for example. Add all of those up from a manual to an automated tool like Onfleet, you're probably looking at about a 50% efficiency improvement overall. And
Yeah.
that is huge when you're
That's not
accounting.
incremental.
Yeah, it's cumulative, right? And then if
Yep.
that is representing 40% of your overall supply chain cost, you're getting
Yep.
potentially 20% of your supply chain cost back in pocket to invest in other places. So
Wow.
really look at the tools you're using, look at the experience, and look at it holistically end to end.
We are clearly, this discussion's already getting a lot of attention from the people that are joining us because we've got a number of questions already. I'm going to throw some of these questions out and just feel free, whomever, to jump in here. Question one is, do you have a number you use for wear and tear on a vehicle per mile? I think they're looking for a little bit of a formula here. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, the federal rate for a cargo van is 69 cents per mile. I don't think that's accurate. I think there's a lot more wear and tear. I think, Jordan, you were talking about that more specifically, and you all might have something.
Yeah. So, I mean, you figure out what your average cost is for the normal service on your vehicle, and then divide that by how many miles you drive between those services. And so I think ours is around like 85 cents
Okay.
for the wear and tear. And
That's
per
very
mile.
helpful. Thank
And
you.
I've got to imagine big and bulky and home furniture. I mean, this has got to be much more expensive. You know, these are much larger items, much heavier items. They're going to put a lot more stress on the vehicle.
100%. You're going to go through tires more. We know that much, right? I know somebody mentioned about tires earlier. Here's another good question for you. Is there an ideal ratio of cost of final mile delivery to the retail dollar sold? So the amount of the sale. Is there an ideal ratio of cost of the delivery compared to the sale, or is that not something you can figure out? I'll throw that one out there, whoever wants to jump on it.
I can take a stab at it. I don't think there's a hard and fast number. It really depends upon your cart value. You know, so if you have very large cart value, you know, you're talking upwards of $200, $300, you're going to be willing to pay upwards of, you know, $20, $30, which is a high number, 10% or 30%, in fact, which is, I think, kind of creeping up there. People do try to keep their costs low. But when you're keeping your costs low, you have to look at how that's impacting your overall business and the overall sort of acquisition of customers. Going back to the idea of obtaining customers and the ideal ratio there, presenting options to customers, making sure that there's presented low or no cost delivery fees. Perhaps they're already embedded into your e-commerce experience. So they're not seeing this $50, $60 delivery fee at the very end, because you're going to lose a lot of customers that way.
We're going to get into that in just a second. You mentioned, by the way, the keyword, the options, which, Hunter, you brought this up. So this question, I'm just going to give it to you straight because this was clearly based on you. So here's the question. How do you balance customer experience and providing more options with route efficiency? It says, for example, a delivery area where volume does not justify frequent trips.
Well, Mark, we actually in Chicago, have a little sneak peek of a map that I've been drawing on recently, but we've zoned out our deliveries of mileage from our warehouse and then direction from our warehouse. And so we definitely have to limit certain days to certain zones, especially for those that are going over 35 miles within Chicago, which is very different than going 100 miles in Nebraska. It's probably the same amount of time. That said, with those limitations, still be open to the nimbleness of turning around a delivery for a customer who has a tight timeline. So at Schlep, we really look at the Net Promoter Score as our way of understanding how a customer's experience was. And right now we sit at like a 90, which is unheard of, but we've been doing this business at a small scale in Chicago for 10 years. And really look at the metric that Chris mentioned, that 84% of customers won't come back to a brand if they had a bad delivery experience. So our number one focus is quality. So to answer the question directly, we will always lose out on profitability if we're creating a good customer experience. So that's where we look at it. Quality trumps density any day.
You're playing the long game.
Playing the long game, exactly.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny that what you just said, because the when you say giving customers options, you're not talking about, hey, when do you want to get it? But here are the three options. I mean, that's the point of the matter is you're saying map that thing out, make it clear that these are great options for the customer, but on the back end, that they're the efficient ones for your company. Carl, do you want to jump in a little bit about that? I thought I saw you nodding.
So the same kind of situation, we try to take care of as many of our customers as possible, but there are those outlying areas that there's not a lot of customers. And I think as long as you have a plan going into it, that you can say, hey, this is when we're going to be there. It may be out a week or something, and then you hit that date. I think that's the important part, that there's a small percentage of customers that they know they probably live a little bit further out. And if you can give them firm dates, they're usually pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, and hit it, right? We talked about that earlier. You want to talk about customer experience. Yeah, if you're going to give them that option for that day, that in a week and a half, you better nail it, right? Don't mess up on that one chance. So this is something that Chris touched on, and I'm going to throw this out to whoever wants to jump on it first. So this is the real quandary for anybody watching, no matter if they've got one store or 100 stores. What do you do about the delivery charge? What is the way that you figure out what that charge is if you charge it, or do you just really kind of fold it in on the back end? Who wants to take that? Because that's been one of the biggest questions that people were asking coming into this webinar today is, how do I figure out what I'm charging for delivery?
Well, I think Carl and Jordan, you guys got to answer this first. You're coming from the store perspective with in-house delivery. I can answer from a provider standpoint, but I think it's gonna be very different response part.
Look, Hunter, look at you running this program. I love that. I'll be back in 10 minutes. No, I love that. Jordan, Carl, whoever wants to take that first, go for it.
Yeah, so there's a few things that we do look at. One, what's the amount of volume that we are selling in a certain zone? It might be 50 or 60 miles away from our warehouse or distribution center, but if we've got the right amount of volume to go there, I mean, it's kind of like, supply and demand a little bit in that sense. But I guess a general number, that I know a lot of organizations kind of go by is almost like $1 a mile is kind of the generic answer.
Okay.
But we do look at how often we are in certain areas and certain places, and even if it's worth offering delivery to a zone. But yeah, the $1 a mile is kind of the metric that we
okay.
had on.
Carl, I want to hear your response. Then I got to follow up for you guys. But what do you guys do at Slumberland?
With the amount of different locations, there are any different kind of structure of those stores. It's almost at a location by location basis, and what's competitive in that market, what kind of area of the country it is. A really small rural area might charge a little bit less for their delivery fees than one that's far, or there's a competition in that market. Larger markets, because of what it takes to drive through town, we might charge a little bit more with what it takes to get that delivery out. So we have a pretty wide range on what we're setting for deliveries, and really it's leaning on the store and the market itself to kind of guide us in what's going to work in those particular areas.
I mean, I'll overly simplify it, but it's sort of like zones almost, essentially, right? You're going to charge certain prices for certain areas that you got to go to based upon distance, stuff like that. All right, Hunter, Chris, either one of you jump in, because now that we get the retailers out of the way.
Yeah,
as Hunter so beautifully
ahead,
set
Hunter.
this up, go for it.
Well, and what I was saying is from our perspective, and I mentioned this in our initial conversations, Schlep considers ourselves the birthplace of local logistics. So we provide that final block experience for retailers, and most of our retail partners, furniture retailers specifically, have a charge. They charge between $125 to $225 or whatever their number is to a customer based on it being white glove threshold, and sometimes they offer curbside. For the experience, they always want threshold or white glove. But then we also have partners in the interior design space, and we have partners in the creative industries or event space. And so, Mark, our pricing is meeting what our partners' needs are. So with event world, we price a certain way. Interior design, we price a certain way. And the most constricted one is our final mile. And so we develop a rate sheet that tries to meet where those retailers are charging their customers and trying not to take a loss. So from their perspective, they just don't want to take a loss on delivery. It's not necessarily a profit zone, but it is an area where they don't want to lose money. So we try to meet them where they're at as far as what they charge the customer for white glove or threshold, and then what Schlep is able to provide in regards to our graduated rates based on distance. So we'll graduate. We'll start with the interior zones, and then the further away we get from our warehouse where we receive the furniture, the more expensive it will be. And usually it meets in the middle somewhere where you lose some, you win some when it comes to deliveries. And I think that's kind of the mark of any sort of middle ground.
I think that's a really great approach, Hunter. And I think, back to what Carl was saying and Jordan was alluding to, it starts in the data, understanding, what your actual cost of goods sold are. And we talked about that a little bit earlier on. Building a dynamic pricing model according to what you need to cover. Working with your delivery partners, whether it's in-house or a third party. Your third party partners like Schlep or others are going to be really useful in guiding sort of what's a reasonable price that you actually would have to cover to present to your end customers. I love my statistics, but interesting statistic of abandoned carts in e-commerce. Those who abandon their carts, 48% of them abandon their cart due to shipping fees or other unexpected costs at the very end. So, being transparent in your pricing, being transparent in your shipping costs, even if you have to include that, making sure it doesn't hit them at the very end, making sure it's transparent or perhaps even rolled up as part of the overall pricing. That's going to be a good strategy to make sure you are actually being forthcoming, with to your delivery requests. And by the way, this also applies to B2B. It's not just B2C we're talking about here.
Okay.
The B2B side of the business, they have the same requirements, they've got the same hard costs, they have the same expectations as a end consumer.
It's interesting because we've talked a lot about the, leaving more time with the customer kind of a situation. And when I really kind of heard from you, Hunter, is that, if you're going to be charging these amounts, whatever it might be, if the customer feels they're getting value, if the customer feels that was money well spent, this is like any other retail situation. You just have to, pardon the pun, you've got to deliver on what you're promising, right? That's really kind of the key. Let me throw this one out to whoever wants to. Well, I'm going to say to the retailers first, to either Jordan or Carl. So in factoring costs of delivery, I'm assuming overall you also have to factor in things like reverse logistics. Can you talk a little bit about how those costs that you sort of work those into this whole process, and some of the lack of a better term, some of the efficiencies that you can also create on the stuff that's coming back your way?
Yeah. As far as, I guess, to answer that would be, when we have an empty truck, let's say we're done with the deliveries and we've got, 50 miles to travel back with an empty truck. We do strategically route our routes to potentially end up near one of our retail stores. And if there's any product that has to come back from the retail store to our distribution center, we take advantage of that. So that would be the big way we try to tackle that, as far as still being as efficient as possible and kind of, killing two birds with one stone kind of deal.
Yeah, Carl, any thoughts on that? By the way, that's a tremendous takeaway, Jordan. Thank you, because that's a great way to manage an empty truck coming back.
It's a good question. We factor them in with having kind of wanting to make sure that our customers, with our return guarantees and satisfaction and things like that, we do end up with some returns, and they're just kind of, hopefully we're doing the best we can to minimize the amount of returns we get, but we do have them, and they mostly just go back to the locations that delivered them in the first place, the process. There isn't anything beyond that, I guess, that we're looking at.
I guess all I'm saying is that this is factoring in the costs all the way through the process. What I mean by that is even that truck, coming back, it's not just this putting this route together is great, but if they're, because of picking things up and returning things, if they're spending another hour and a half on the road, I mean, there's just, I'm just, I guess, asking about whether or not, how critical the attention is to all aspects of sales and or returns, and even some of that reverse logistics can also be some of the packaging or anything that's being brought back. Anything that you want to add to that, Hunter or Chris?
Well, just speaking towards some of what Jordan and Carl was saying earlier, we always look to not have empty miles. And you just mentioned it, Jordan, when you're sending a delivery out, you don't want to have an empty truck coming back to the warehouse. How can we utilize that? And
Yeah.
the same thing happens in the way we route, because of the unique way we work with clients, both from our warehouse and within different zip codes around Chicago. We're able to route to make sure we're not doing any drive time that is over 5 miles that's empty. And that's our goal. We don't always meet that. Sometimes we do have a team that's coming back 30 miles from Lake Forest into the city, and we didn't have anything for them. So our goal is to, once they end that delivery, is there something within 5 miles that they can get to that is a paid portion of the route? And we really look at controlling our customer scheduling in a way that we can maximize that mark.
Okay, Chris?
And Onfleet's a big part of that, by the way. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks for the plug, Hunter. So, I think reverse logistics are increasingly important. I see a lot of companies cropping up at trade shows, kind of focusing specifically in this space. What's the experience post-purchase? How do they actually log and make that request? And in building the routes, you can be fairly static, and you can actually, just as Jordan's doing, you can actually say, okay, we're going to do a pickup on the way back, no empty miles. Love that, Hunter. I'm going to steal that. Thank you very much. But also the idea of having dynamic routing. So when a driver is in the field, if you get a return request coming in, and there happens to be a driver in that area who has capacity on that particular truck or in that van, our system knows that, and we can automatically reroute without the driver even really noticing anything changing. He just has a new stop inserted, perhaps after his next drop off, that says, okay, now go here because you're going to be 2 doors down and do this pickup, because you have capacity, because you have time, with respect to all the SLAs and customer deliveries that are already in the van. And this is where you get into a really interesting and exciting world of we call continuous routing, which is what the Ubers and Amazons and DoorDash are doing.
It's real time.
Real time, yeah.
Yeah, I've always had a penchant for wondering about reverse logistics, because I think it's something that's critical, but it's also sometimes forgotten in a lot of the planning. It's always what we're sending out, not what we're bringing back. So we got another good question here. It's going to be a toss up. These are always fun. Do you deliver in original packaging and unpack in home, or do you unpack and prep in the warehouse first?
I can speak to that real quick. It depends. We do offer a couple different types of delivery. So the threshold, or the factory packaging, curbside delivery, and then also premium delivery. So when we speak about premium delivery, it's kind of what we call, the white glove, or in Hunter's case, the black glove. We call it premium delivery. And we do the inspections in the warehouse, and we do prep that furniture before we put it on the truck, just because the amount of miles we travel, the second delivery, if you're traveling 150 miles away from your distribution center, is just crazy expensive. And so, yeah, we do inspect everything before we load.
Okay, Carl?
Similar, I like to do a lot of the prep work in the warehouse, so that when the drivers can spend their time driving, and then spending the time getting into the customer's home, instead of putting things together, assembling, putting handles on, anything that we can make their job a little bit easier while they're out on the road, create some efficiencies for them to be able to have that time with the customer, and be able to demo the product and things like that without spending their whole day just putting end tables and coffee tables together.
Okay, fair. This is also interesting that came from one of our solution rooms recently, and I want to ask this as well. This seems unique, and I'm not suggesting anybody here does this, but if you've heard about this being utilized, whether or not it works, there was a mention that there's some entities that are charging a delivery amount and making it good for a year of deliveries. Clever to try to encourage reorders. Have you heard about that? Anybody? I'm just curious. Maybe not. But...
This is a really unique offering, Mark. It's like a subscription to delivery, and I could, it's sort of like the Amazon Prime model to a degree. When you think of it, but it's certainly something that I think would probably, for high cost deliveries, could be beneficial to the end customer. But I think proceed with caution, because then you get people like me who are going to order something every day, and then all of a sudden that single customer has blown the cost off the roof.
I don't know. There's a lot of retailers. I got a feeling that if you're going in there every every month buying some more furniture, I think they're going to figure that they got you hooked and they'll figure out how to make that profitable. Hunter, what were you going to say?
We provide a subscription model for our interior design clients, but it's, it's based on projects and we do have a limit. So there's always some boundary in place.
Sure.
But for retail, for furniture, that's something that is by the order. So, it's going in so many disparate locations as far as who that end client is, that it's just by the order.
Okay. I have to ask this question because it's something that we keep a real eye on here at HFA when it comes to advocacy and things for members, et cetera. But we're always looking about regulatory questions. And I'm just wondering, I want to throw this out to everybody here. I know that in this calendar year, there was supposed to be some increases to the Unified Carrier Registration, the UCR, and even talk about a larger bump next year. Can anybody kind of give us an idea about where we are from a regulatory standpoint? Because once again, you can sit here and figure your delivery costs all day long, but if you've got some fees like that going up, it's gonna obviously change the equation. Can anybody give us an idea about concerns you have about any regulatory issues?
I would say we don't really keep that probably as close of an eye on that as we should, honestly, those types of fees just to run the business, to run parts of the business. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something going to start keeping in mind. So that's a good question.
Wow.
There's a lot of verticals and industries where this is pretty important, more regulated industries, pharmaceutical, cannabis, alcohol. But specific to furniture and big and bulky, I haven't seen that impacting as much. But it does depend on the nature of the labor force you're working with. So if you're working with a third party, you're sort of offsetting some of those considerations to Schlep, saying, "Hey, I don't want to deal with this. Thank you very much, Schlep, for dealing with it." Or if you're looking at engaging with gig workers, which we also enable via our platform, you can have a sort of augmented labor force. And what does that have implications for? And a lot of people are moving to more hybrid models, right? I'm going to have my in-house fleet. I'm going to try and have as much capacity running through my in-house fleet, but I'm going to have flex labor force, whether that's a third party, gig workers I pull in on an ad hoc basis, or whatever model works for you. So each of those different considerations, and this also ties back to the idea of insuring, like your drivers. That's a big consideration that I'm sure all of these gentlemen have experience with as well. So kind of depends on vertical and the industry you're working in.
And I would just highly recommend keeping an eye on that regulatory, because boy, there's just sometimes these deadlines come up and nobody's really aware of it, and all of a sudden you're sitting there with a 15% hike in what seems like a minor cost, but across the board and across the year is going to be expensive. So no doubt about that. You kind of lead me into the question that I know that Hunter is dying for me to ask of this group. So let's talk about it, because I know that Carl, you guys have your own trucks and third party. Can you talk a little bit about this outsourcing piece? And this isn't about a commercial here. This is really just more about really kind of talking about pros and cons, et cetera, and where this makes sense. Can you start it out, since you guys use both?
Pros and cons. I think there's a lot of things that go into whether my lean towards using our home crews, obviously having our brand in store. That's very important to us to bring that to the customer's home after they've been in store with us. I think for a lot of the times, though, there's the seasonality that comes within furniture. And sometimes we're getting the orders come up on those big sale weekends that we need a little bit more help. So we tap into the third party a lot there. Staffing side of it is a big one. We talked about that a couple of times here today, that sometimes we just can't find those drivers. So we have to reach out to some of our third parties and have some help increase on their side then and get those deliveries out. But it really is regional. Some places we have a third party that we've been working with for 20 years, and it's the same people. They come in, they know our product, they know our people, and we kind of help them and they help us. In some other markets, it's reaching out just for that spur of the moment. We need another truck. We've lost a guy, whether it's they can't drive for us due to some sort of regulation that out there. So
okay, I know that there's a number of retailers in our space that that do a hybrid model like you're talking about. And sometimes there's some that use it for their own crews, do all the local, and they use a third party for a little more of the long distance stuff. But Jordan, you guys, I guess all of your trucks are your own, yeah?
Yep. We
Have
own
you-
all of our own trucks, and then all our crews, all of our delivery crews are in-house. Yep.
What's to you in helping people out there make the decision? What do you think the advantages of a no outsource model? Because you got some guys putting some miles on the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the biggest pro is being able to obviously be a direct manager, build the relationships with your employees, being able to, let them know every day, what our vision and mission are, and just really driving that home and having the ability to not leave that up to chance with a crew that you may not be, in touch with every single day. So yeah, the in-house thing has worked great for us, and really it's just having, I'm a little biased, but I would feel like we have a little bit more control over certain situations.
I'll let Hunter go last, but I want to ask Chris this question. With what was just said, so you got two different models here from two different retailers. What do you counsel a retailer that's trying to figure out one or the other or both together? So what are the things they should be looking at? I know that cost is a piece of it, but there's got to be risk liability. There's got to be a lot more to this.
There is a lot to it. And, I think it is on a sort of individual basis. Each of these models are valid. We see it all, by the way. And we, as we mentioned earlier, we power carriers and couriers and can connect you with those carriers and couriers via marketplaces that operate to sort of orchestrate and find the appropriate coverage, appropriate service, everything that you need. That said, it's rare to find an operation as robust and as Schlep, for example, right? There's a lot of fly-by-night operations, and you need to make sure that who you're partnering with is going to reflect your brand in the appropriate way. Cost is always going to be a consideration, but as we discussed earlier, those costs can have unforeseen consequences. If you're just trying to go for like the lowest cost, you're going for the large operation who's going to maybe put the squeeze on the drivers a little bit and they're running a little longer than they should. That's going to impact the experience for the recipient. So, I think it's really looking at this again, very holistically, considering what regions you'll be able to cover. Another really interesting model I've seen here is when you're expanding to new territories. So let's say you're evaluating, should I start running a new fleet
Right.
To a neighboring territory that that I'm not supporting today? Well, tap into a third party. Say, hey, could you run a few lines for me before investing in that in-house fleet? There's really interesting ways and tests you can run with these third parties, and sort of shopping around a little bit before landing on the 2, 3, 5 year contract to make sure that they're a good fit for you. And I do think that the hybrid flex models, it just sort of provides the best of all worlds, like for my personal opinion, because it allows you to account for some of those seasonal differences that we all see.
All right, so we got one third-party company on this webinar, so I guess we got to hear from them. Go ahead, Hunter. I mean, no, listen. How do you? I mean, look, I think that any good business in this world is about fit. Look, you got to realize that Schlep's going to be a great fit for some, and it's not going to be a great fit for others. Here you got Jordan talking about the fact that they're just not dealing with third party. You got Slumberland that utilizes it. So talk about that, and from a pragmatic standpoint, when what are those decision metrics that a company should have in deciding whether or not to outsource all or part of their delivery?
Well, yeah, first and foremost, I think the best way to go is in-house, because as Jordan said, you have control and you can control quality. And that's the main difference with Schlep. We don't use contractors. So as a third-party provider, we're not just consolidating and aggregating all the contracts we can do and then subcontracting them out,
Right.
which is what I think is a big problem in this industry, is that even when you do have a bigger provider, I won't name names, but you all know all of them, they then aggregate and subcontract, and that's where you lose quality. And so that's where we actually get subcontracted out some of those deliveries, and we're always providing the highest net promoter score. So I do think in-house is always the best way to go. But there's two types of customers who can use us, Mark. There's small retailers, not the size of Jordan and Carl, like literally small, mid-century modern boutiques that were doing it themselves. and then they're just getting too busy to do it themselves and they're breaking their back. And Schlep, we're experts in this. We're professionals. We're trained. I mean, our turnover rate is 35%. So most of our employees, we've been around for 10 years. Most of our employees have been with us for 2, 6, 7, 8 years at this point. So we are doing this every day and we like doing it. So they'll use us and then they'll get to a size where maybe it does become time to consider in-house again, because you can justify a full-time employee and buy in your own van. And oftentimes we'll lose some of those mid-market retailers because of that. But when it comes to the big retailers, most of them end up outsourcing because they're looking at the cost of doing business. And I think most of them, and I don't know if this is the case for Slumberland or you, Jordan, as Ashley Home Stores subsidiary, like you all, or franchise, excuse me, you all probably might lose some on delivery. I think the overall benefit of having it in-house is that you can eat some of those costs because you're the person selling the furniture. And so you can take the risk a little more and increase the quality, understanding that maybe one year you lose money on the logistics. So we always know that it's not one size fit all, but what we try to do at Schlep is provide a great place to work. So our focus is on the customer experience just as much as it is on the employee experience. And then when it comes to getting new partners, we also realize if we don't do all of your deliveries, we at least can be expanded capacity for you. So Carl was mentioning this, when there is like a holiday period or some seasonality, we may need Schlep to come in and do 20 deliveries a week just so we don't get bottlenecked.
And you know what I'm hearing too here is this is like any other decision, right? It's not a question of you're looking for to outsource this just to move product. You've got to think about, is this a good fit from a standpoint of the culture piece of who you're hiring? Do they have that control, like you're talking about, over the people that are going out and the quality of the delivery? You've got to ask about all those things. It's not just the dollars, right? It's got to be a relational fit because you essentially are representing the retailer. So
Yeah.
I think that to me is the part of it that's one of those intangibles that is absolutely so critical. So we've
Mark,
talked.
I'm going to cut you off because I've got something that didn't come up yet. My biggest pitch to clients is that we also at the same time as representing the client, when a problem happens, we're so well branded at Schlep that the customer doesn't complain to the client, they complain to Schlep. So we also are a little bit of a shield for our customer when it comes to that.
How dare you interrupt me? But no, I love that. No, listen, I appreciate that. Anything we can add in. We're working our way toward the end of our time together, but I do want to talk about this. Just really kind of came up strong in this last little section here. So I'm going to throw this one out to anybody that wants to jump in. So labor is an issue, huge right now. Turnover is an issue. You guys have to be, we've talked about this in a previous webinar about this. The retention piece is absolutely critical. So talk briefly, if you could, about how that whole issue is really impacting these costs of delivery. Are you finding, and guys, I don't know if you've got some magic pill here that'll solve this, but Jordan and Carl, let me start with you guys. Are there things that you're doing to try to really offset the need for labor and labor that's going to stick around?
Yeah, the big thing that we do just to combat the low turnover, kind of like what Hunter was saying, I was in the 30s. We're right around there as well. It's just making sure that your staff is engaged and they understand that what they're doing is important, and always having something for them to reach, some sort of goal, or making some sort of contest out of it and keeping it fresh and keeping it fun. Because let's be honest, no one really wakes up or is in grade school or middle school and says my dream job's a furniture delivery professional. It just doesn't exist. So you just got to keep it fresh and fun, and that's how we combat it. And we do tiers. We do a certain number of career deliveries, and when you hit a certain number, your job title changes. And so as far as the cost goes to the labor, not really anything of that, but just more so just keeping your people engaged and happy.
You're gonna have to pay the wage. You're gonna have to pay whatever the prevailing wage is, but we're talking about a lot of those intangibles. Carl, what about y'all?
I think Jordan hit it on several things there. You got to keep it fun, make sure that they're engaged with the process, that they understand that what they do is really important. We always talk to them about them being the last person the customer sees and how important that is to the brand, how much of an influence they have with that customer. If they're the last person in the house, then they do everything that they could possibly do to make sure that that experience is good for the customer. Making sure that they get the recognition that when they do hit some big numbers, or some of our guys are delivering a ton of merchandise throughout the year, that we make sure that we recognize them and tell them that what they do, remind them of the accomplishment that they made over the last year. So it's just the constant feedback and talking to them, making sure they feel part of the whole process.
And are there some, and I know this might be a question for Chris, are there some good delivery driver compensation strategies as well? I mean, I kind of hear, I mean, there's metrics, things like that, but incentivization, things like that. I mean, Chris, what are you seeing? Maybe you'd be the best one to answer that question.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, there's all sorts of gamification models to make it more sort of like entertaining, maybe. But when you boil it down to a happy driver, give them the tools they like to use. Give them stuff that's straightforward, that's intuitive. We've got the highest rated driver application in the marketplace. If you look at like Android and Apple reviews and others, we've got 5-star ratings. Others have like 1, 2-star ratings. Those are unhappy drivers using tools that they don't understand or don't make sense or are clunky. And then within that app, they have training tools. They've got localized language support. They've got the ability to go look at their own analytics so they can see for themselves how are they performing. This empowers them so they're not just a cog in the machine, that they sort of have a ownership of their destiny.
Gotcha. I want to mention, by the way, we've got a little bit of an update here. That discussion, I should say, about the delivery charges good for the year. That actually came from RC Willie. That's a top 100 Berkshire property out west, and they say it works great and creates loyalty. So little something to throw out there. I see Jordan's. Yeah, the wheels are grinding. That may be coming to Nebraska soon. We're not sure. Let me do this. We're getting toward the end here. There was I've used this line the last time we talked about delivery, and it was one of the great lines that I heard from a really successful retailer, especially when COVID was happening, and it was just like, man, people are waiting forever for their stuff. And they said they give their delivery crews this one mantra, which is celebrate the delivery, as a way of really bringing that to it. Let's end this way. Quick one shots here. Give us, as we leave, what's an intangible, something like that, little nugget you can throw out there that somebody might be able to use, whether they're their own delivery trucks or third party, who wants to hit that? You got one intangible that's just like, it's kind of cool that your delivery guys do or something?
Well, there's 2 parts of that for us, Mark. In the mornings, we buy coffee for our customers and our teams. So we actually understand the start of day is tough. So we say, stop by, get yourself a coffee, and bring a coffee to your first delivery of the day. Just a little small marketing thing that Schlep does. But we always talk about it more broadly as smiling while you sweat. And that's what we want. We want team members who, I disagree with you, Jordan. I think someone maybe was in high school thinking, I want to get delivery of a driver someday. But we want people to smile while they sweat. And that to us, Mark, is who we're looking for on our team at Schlep.
Love it. Anybody else want to jump in with a quick intangible?
I'll build on that. 2 sides. Empower your drivers, give them the tools that they can kind of run things for themselves. But also on the other side, trust but verify. Look at your data, monitor performance, understand where your efficiencies might be dropping or where you might have opportunity for improvement. Live in your data.
Okay. Jordan, Carl?
Yeah, ours is, we always just try to obviously be very friendly and serviceable with the customer, but it's just making a good comment about their home. Or I think who you might have been referencing to was, the line was, wow, that looks great. Just something that simple. That's it. I mean, just making them feel good about their purchase.
Okay. And Carl, you get the last word.
Last word. I always like to tell the drivers, make it pop, to have the power of positivity. Just go into their day with positive attitude, and that'll make the day go better.
And all those things you're talking about, guys, we know that it comes back to those delivery guys, right? Because if they get a positive response, and we're talking about cost here, you want to talk about a retention piece, making the drivers feel good in that interaction. These are not just throwaway intangibles. This is good stuff. great takeaways. I want to thank our panel, Carl Monson with Slumberland. We got Jordan Marquardt with HomeTrends, Hunter Riley with Schlep, and finally Chris Garrison with Onfleet. Guys, this has been great. And a reminder once again, myhfa.org/webinar. You'll see this one. This is worth seeing again. But guys, we really appreciate it. I think you've done a lot to help retailers of all sizes today. As always, I'd like to thank you for joining us and wishing you two things. One is the best of health, and the second is great sales. I'm Mark Schumacher on behalf of the entire HFA team. I want to thank you. We'll see you next time.